With the latest generation of Sony cameras, the slow and quick mode known as S&Q has never been easier. So follow along, go grab your camera, and I'm going to show you how to capture beautiful time lapses like these. So what'd you think of those time lapses? Pretty dope, right? Those were all captured on my Sony FX6 or FX3, and today I'll be demonstrating how to get everything dialed in on the Sony FX3, but if you have any of the newer generation Sony cameras that have S&Q mode, you could follow right along. Now the first thing we want to do is make sure S&Q mode is selected. On the FX3, hit your mode button and move your dial over to S&Q. Now I want to make this known, for this demo, we have the latest firmware version on the FX3, and we now have that quick menu like the FX6 and 9 set up, and that's where I'm going to be demonstrating everything. However, if you don't have that quick menu, it's still easy to find in the Sony camera settings where to adjust these. Now there's a couple settings that we want to get set up, and that's starting with the project frame rate and the S&Q frame rate. For our recording frame rates, we have three different options: 24, 30, and 60. If you at any point want to slow down this time lapse, I'd select 60 frames per second. So next we have our S&Q frame rate option. There's 1, 2, 4, 8, and so on, and 1, 2, and 4 seem to be my go-to. Now this all depends on the subject that you're recording the time lapse for, how fast or slow it's moving. So if we select 1 frame or 2 frames per second, that motion should be pretty quick. But if it's not, say the clouds in your scene are moving slower, you might want to try 4 or 8 to showcase more movement. So now that we got those 2 frame rates set up, we want to adjust our shutter speed. And if you're familiar with video, you're probably going to double the shutter speed. However, when it comes to time lapses in camera, we want to showcase motion blur. So by having a slower shutter, we're able to do so. Now for the shutter speed, sweet spot seems to be anywhere from 1/3 to 1/8 of a second. I usually go with 1/5. Now, if you're not using the FX6 with internal ND filters, you're going to quickly realize that your exposure is going to be blown out. What we're going to need to do, especially if you're doing a time lapse, you could do one of two things. We can close down the lens and go to F8, F11, being that if we're doing a landscape time lapse, you're gonna want majority of everything in focus. But if not, what you need to do is just throw on an ND filter onto your lens. Now we're almost ready to roll tape. One more step. We're gonna go into manual focus with our camera. The point is, autofocus could bounce around during our time lapse, and it could be distracting, jarring, and ruin that time lapse. So by using focus peaking or focus magnifier in your camera, focus on your subject in manual focus so we can make sure it's tack sharp throughout the whole time lapse. Now that manual focus is set up, we're ready to roll tape, and I suggest doing a test time lapse. I'll roll in for about 5 minutes and watch the playback, making sure there's no discrepancies in what it is that I'm capturing, and also to make sure that the motion blur is to my taste and I'm liking it. Once I have those settings dialed in, I'm gonna roll my tape for 10, 15, 20 minutes, a half hour, however long I need this time lapse to be, depending on if you're filming, say, a graffiti artist doing your mural, or you're just trying to capture a beautiful sunset or something like the Northern Lights. Now for my last tip, depending on which camera you're on, you want to be in your native ISO. The time lapse that I showed of the Northern Lights was at 12,800 and at f1.8, obviously because it was so dark. Now let me know in the comments how it is that you guys are getting your time lapses. Are you using the S&Q mode, or are you still doing them the old school way? Now I know nothing beats photos for time lapses if you want to zoom in and zoom out when you have high megapixel cameras. But for something like your social content, whether it's a reel or even a client video, I think getting them in camera and being able to grade them to match the rest of your footage is a really good option if you don't need to take the photos. If you thought this video was helpful, please leave a like and a comment. And if you're new here, consider subscribing and hit that notification bell so you're alerted every time I drop a new video. Until next time, guys, I'm Jason Anthony. Peace out.